Coming up on Tech News Weekly, Jason Howell and I talked to Rene Ritchie of youtube.com/Rene Ritchie about Apple's Unleashed event. We've got AirPods, HomePods, new Macs with new processors. There's a lot to cover. Then we talked to Ben Schoon of 9 to 5 Google about Google's Pixel event. New phones in hand in some cases, plus so much more. Before we round things out with our stories of the week, I talk about Nvidia launching a newer, better version of its cloud streaming service. And we continue with the gaming theme from Jason Howell as we talk about Batman Arkham Knight coming to Stadia streaming and the future of streaming on Stadia.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 206, recorded Thursday, October 21st, 2021.
This episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Stripe. Whether you're an online or in-person retailer, software platform, marketplace, or a subscription business, visit stripe.com to learn more about how Stripe can support your business today.
And by Compiler, an original podcast from Red Hat discussing tech topics big, small, and strange. Listen to Compiler on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to podcasts.
And by PlexTrack, the powerful yet simple security management platform that helps you to get the real cybersecurity work done. With PlexTrack, you'll streamline your assessments, analytics, and reporting. Visit plextrack.com/twit and claim your free month. Hello, and welcome to Tech News Weekly, the show where every week we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news. I am one of your hosts, Mikah Sargent.
And I'm the other one, Jason Howell. Good to see you, Mikah. And what a week this has been. If you like hardware, this is one of those weeks of the year that you look forward to.
Indeed. In fact, it was just kind of laden with stuff, so much so that Samsung hopped on and said, you know what, we want to do something too, but they didn't really have anything. And so they just sort of stood in front of the camera and said, hey, here's something. Anyway, we're not talking about
customize
Samsung
your
today.
Foldable. No.
Because exactly. Oh, what a silly event. But outside of that, we did get some really interesting things from big tech. And the first one on the docket, because it was on a Monday, was Apple's event, Apple's Unleashed event on a Monday, M for MacBook. We are joined today by Rene Ritchie of youtube.com/Rene Ritchie to talk all about it. Welcome back to the show, Rene.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Mike. I love doing this show.
Well, we are happy to have you here and happy to get into it. Apple kicked off the event. It was funny to Leo's concern with a conversation about music. He thought, "Oh no, if they're talking about this, what are they gonna get to the MacBooks? Are there MacBooks?" We got to that later, but we did want to start off with some of the hardware announcements that were made at the beginning. First, let's just get the HomePod Mini out of the way. It comes in new colors. Are you excited about that?
It comes in colors. Well, you and I both have big HomePod Mini love, and I think this is. It probably should have come. I hate saying that, but it probably should have come in colors because that matches Apple's consumer strategy. They're making colorful everything at the consumer end now. So this just feels like a completion rather than anything really new.
Yeah, definitely. Sort of filling in the gaps. If they would have made a green one, I would have spent all of my money on
it's half the iMac colors.
Exactly.
Where's the rest of the iMac colors?
Maybe those will come later. I hope. We'll see.
I want purple.
But that would be really sharp. I'd like that. Yeah. Moving right along, the next thing was something that had been long rumored, which was a new iteration of and a new generation of AirPods. This is the standard AirPods, not AirPods Pro. These are the third generation AirPods, and Apple actually is selling these along with the second generation AirPods, the more standard ones, I believe at $129. These ones come in at $179, $249 for AirPods Pro, and then way too much money for the AirPods Max. But can you tell me a little bit about these AirPods, sort of especially what differentiates them from AirPods Pro? Because you look at them and the design looks pretty similar to AirPods Pro, but there is a difference here.
Yeah, there's a couple. One is they don't have the same silicon tips. I know a lot of people, like myself included, love the silicon tips because they fit easily in the ear. But there are also a whole contingent of people who they don't want anything in their ear. They find it incredibly painful, and they much prefer the traditional EarPod, AirPod in the ear sort of arrangement. So this maintains that for them, which is huge. It also gives spatial audio, which is Apple's big thing. They're all in on Dolby Atmos and spatial audio. It does not provide the noise canceling or the transparency mode that AirPods Pro does. And that's probably why there's still a big differentiation in the two.
That makes sense. These I think come in at an interesting price point between the more standard ones and the ones that you get that have the added features. One of the things that I found interesting was the playtime that you get with these versus the AirPods Pro, which have, among the AirPods lineup, outside of AirPods Max, have the shortest battery life at this point. Is that because of all the processing that goes on with the AirPods Pro, and sort of where do these come in terms of the processing that's built into them? Because I think a lot of folks will probably remember this adaptive EQ and the microphones that are listening both inside and outside of your ear with the AirPods Pro. Do these do some of that listening, and how does that work?
Yeah, so I mean, Apple has what they call an H1 chip in these, and H1 is a 10 audio core. It's not like a CPU core, but it's an audio processing core. AirPods Pro use 10 of those cores because they do the active noise cancellation and the transparency mode. These don't use quite as much. These are somewhere in between, I think, the original AirPods 2, and AirPods Pro. But they do things like they have a new sensor that doesn't just detect proximity, but detects skin, and it can handle a wide range of pigmentations. So if you take it out and put it on a table, it knows that it's not in your ear still. So it has better power savings on top of that. And also because it's not doing all the noise cancellation, it's much lighter on the battery usage. So you get that extended time out of it.
Okay. That makes sense. And then we've got the big things, both literally and figuratively. A redesigned MacBook Pro in 14-inch and 16-inch models with a huge step up in chip design. And these, the M1 Pro and the M1 Max, I think a lot of people thought of this next generation sort of being an iteration on what came with Apple's first silicon. But tell us more about these chips and how much of a sort of boost and next gen we're getting with this round of devices.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, one of the things that Apple has done so well is that my big concern when they started making their own silicon is they become essentially a silicon vendor like a Qualcomm is. They would just have Apple Watch as a client, and iPhone as a client, iPad, MacBook as a client, and that would destroy all the efficiencies that they had. But what they did instead was a scalable architecture. So you have like A13 cores in the Apple Watch. Now you have A14 cores in the MacBook and the MacBook Pro, and you have A15 cores in the iPhone and the new iPads. And it allows them to sort of get the maximum they can out of all of their generational chipset designs. And what we're seeing here is basically an M1, two M1s kind of strapped together. And that's not trivial. It's like saying, I want a faster car. Can you just tie these two cars together? And there's a myriad ways that could go horribly, horribly wrong. So a lot of the work that went in here was being able to double the amount of wheels, double the amount of engines, but make them actually work together so they're not just tearing themselves apart the entire time.
Yeah, that makes sense. These processors are 2 and 3 times larger actual physically, and definitely seem to be kind of the next design, the next iteration. Do we think that so Apple announces the M1, and then now we've got the M1 Pro and the M1 Max. If you could sort of look into the future, is the M2 going to be an iteration on that M1 chip, do you think? Or is M2 going to be an iteration on this, M1 Pro, M1 Max design? Is it going to, do you think it'll go kind of M1, M1 Pro, M1 Max, and then we'll have M2, M2 Pro, M2 Max as we continue to see these generations play themselves out? If you had to guess, of course, at the strategy there.
Yeah. For sure. Well, to your first point, I mean, one of the AnandTech tweets, I always love how AnandTech looks at these things. They said there's 57 billion transistors in the M1 Max, which is, I think, as much, if not more, than Nvidia's Ampere, which is like king of the amount of transistors, but at 5 nanometers, so it's way, way smaller. And I think what's going to happen is Apple's really good at doing the scalable architecture. So M1 is based on the A14, the chip in the iPhone 12. It's what we would have called an A14X in the old days, but it has a bunch of extra things to go along with that. And so what I'm expecting is that we have an A15 now in the iPhone 13, and M2 will be based on that. And the big differences there are the M1 and the A14 have Firestorm and Ice Storm cores, which I joke is like, a dance of ice and fire. Like it's a very Game of Thronesy expression. But the A15 has Blizzard and Avalanche, and I think those are just beyond cute names. That shows that it's a much cooler chip. They doubled the cache size. They did increase frequency on the performance cores, but they increased the efficiency cores by, I think, up to 30% in terms of power, and the GPUs are much more powerful. So I'm guessing M2 will be the ultra low power version. It'll be basically an A15X, and that'll go into the next MacBook Air. And then we'll see, because Apple didn't make X chips every generation. There was an A10X, but no A11X, an A12X, but no A13X. So whether they do the Pro and the Max version every year, I don't know. Maybe those will be every 2 years. Maybe they'll be every year. I think a lot of it's going to be how fast they need to rev on these products.
That makes sense. Anything that, of course, during the event, you get a lot of detail that pours in and pours out. Now that you've had time to sort of digest, at least early, the event and some of the stuff that was announced, any sort of tidbits or things that have stuck out to you that you wanted to mention having to do with these new MacBook Pros in particular?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's most exciting to me, I always love it when you only have to choose size. Like when the bigger iPhone has better cameras, I don't like it because I don't always want to have to get the bigger iPhone. And what I really like here is that Apple has the 14-inch and the 16-inch, and they pretty much have the same capabilities. You can get a binned-down version of the M1 Pro if you don't want to spend as much money. You don't think you need all of those 10 cores. Like you can get an 8-core version instead, and a reduced GPU core version if you want to. But if you get the pure M1 Pro or the pure M1 Max, that comes in the 14 or 16 inch. Unlike the iPad Pro, where you didn't get a mini LED display in the smaller one, you get mini LED in both of these. Literally feature by feature, you can choose the bigger version or the smaller version. And like, you may get, if you fire every core, if you fire all 32 graphics cores, maybe the 16 has a bigger thermal envelope and will get you a little bit longer sustained performance. But otherwise, like you can basically just choose your size. And I always find that just way better options.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That is very nice that you don't have to sort of settle just by getting the smaller one whenever it comes to power, because same thing applies with iPhone. For me, I'm okay with that bigger phone, but for folks who, they want to go the smaller one, but they want the features of the big one, that does kind of stink. So it's been nice having that when Apple occasionally does do that. Rene Ritchie, of course, I want to thank you so much for joining us today to talk about the Apple event, a quick walkthrough of what Apple announced, and we appreciate those tidbits there at the end. Of course, folks can head to youtube.com/Rene Ritchie to follow along. Anything you want to plug or any place you want folks to go to follow you online?
Mac Break Weekly, right here on TWiT, where Leo, Andy, Alex, and I get into the absolute best and most loving arguments possible every week.
Indeed. That is a good way to put it. All right, Rene Ritchie, thanks so much, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Rene.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Mikah.
All righty, folks. Up next, Google's Pixel event kicked off this Tuesday, and we've got some early thoughts about Google's latest smartphones. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Stripe. If you're a startup founder, you know early decisions can be the difference between success and failure. One decision that thousands of successful founders have made is choosing Stripe as their payments platform. Stripe is leveling the global playing field for those looking to start new business or those seeking to expand an existing business, whether you're a pre-seed startup or a Fortune 500 company. Over the past decade, Stripe has made processing payments simple and borderless, enabling ambitious businesses such as Shopify, Lyft, and Kickstarter to grow revenue and expand to new markets quickly. Stripe is easy to use. Once it's integrated, their single platform and world-class docs allow businesses to easily experiment to scale and grow revenue. Stripe processes billions of dollars each year for every size of business, and Stripe releases hundreds of features and improvements each year to help you stay ahead of industry shifts. They support 135 plus currencies and payment types, and Stripe is very reliable, 99.999% API uptime, and handles more than 250 million API requests per day. By partnering with Stripe, you can free up your team to focus on other areas of your business. That's because Stripe has engineered the world's most powerful and easy-to-use APIs, so you can get up and running in minutes, not days. And for those looking for a no-code solution, well, Stripe recently launched Payment Links, a product that allows you to sell online by generating a link you can share with your customers to get paid fast, and it doesn't require any coding. Stripe also has an invested interest in our Earth. With Stripe Climate, this is so cool whenever we get to talk to Stripe about this. Stripe Climate, you can direct a fraction of your revenue to help scale emerging carbon removal technologies in just a few clicks. Such a neat idea. So whether you're an online or in-person retailer, a software platform, a marketplace, or a subscriptions business, visit stripe.com to learn more about how Stripe can support your business today. That's stripe.com to learn more and get started today. Thanks so much to Stripe for sponsoring this week's episode of Tech News Weekly. Jason Howell, it is your turn, sir.
Oh, yeah. So we started the week with Apple and their hardware event with all sorts of fireworks and devices that we all will now want. And then the very next day, Google followed up with its own hardware announcement, one that we saw coming for quite a while. At least Google was not shy about their latest hardware. The Pixel 6 and the Pixel 6 Pro actually have both devices in my possession. You know, this is a little bit of a flex. This is about all I can show you, really, to be honest, is the hardware and the home screen on the devices. But I figured today we'd spend less time talking about the basics around this hardware event and hopefully dive in a little deeper on some of the things that some may have missed. And that's why I've invited 9to5 Google's senior editor, Ben Schoon, to join us to chat about that. Welcome back to the show, Ben.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Always great to get you on. Thank you for carving out some time for us today. So before we get into, you've written many articles about, and I've thought a lot of articles about the Pixel 6 that kind of reveal some things that are easy to miss. So we're going to talk about all this stuff. But before we get to that, what are your thoughts as far as like, you know, during the event, leading up to the event, we knew so much about these devices. Were there any surprises, anything that surprised you during the event, something that you didn't already know that you're curious about?
Sadly, not really. The event was everything we expected because there were so many leaks beforehand, whether from Google's own announcements or things that we found and others found through digging. And then it was really the retailer leaks that kind of confirmed every last little detail from the camera features to the price to all of that. So there really weren't any surprises. It was just interesting to see how Google was positioning these phones.
Yeah, indeed. So, okay, so let's dive into these. We'll start off with the 6 Pro here. You wrote an article that kind of touches on a few, tidbits of both of the devices. But you wrote about something that I hadn't noticed, at least in person. You wrote about this bar up here and how it's basically a plastic bar up at the very top, which I think some people might see that on a premium phone that's, supposedly a glass sandwich or something that they're looking forward to in that regard and go, hey, wait a minute, why are you mixing it up with some plastic materials here? Tell us a little bit about why plastic up there.
So Google did confirm to us that little window is what it's called, the antenna window, is 4 millimeter wave connectivity, which doesn't really go so well through glass and through metal. So actually a lot of flagship phones now, iPhone 13, I actually have a Galaxy Z Fold 3 here that has the same thing, have a little plastic window somewhere on the frame to help the millimeter wave connection stay as strong as possible to get the fastest speeds that you can. So that's also the reason why you don't see that on the normal Pixel 6, because the unlocked Pixel 6 that Google is selling at store and some of the carrier variants of it also does not have millimeter wave. So yeah, that's the reason for the plastic. It is kind of weird, Google's implementation, since it sticks out so far and so obviously on the top. I think the biggest issue with it is that you can see it from the front. I think that's why it's going to be kind of annoying to some people.
Yeah, of course, if you're throwing a case on there, maybe not so much.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, I'm not so certain I'm going to tempt fate by not putting a case on this device. I just have a history with dropping devices, so this is where I'm at this point. So it's probably not going to affect me or impact me nearly as much as someone who's flying free. Now, the Verizon version of the Pixel 6 devices. They're, at least I know with the 6 Pro, it's at least $100 more than if you buy it unlocked from Google. Could be that way with other carriers, right? Is that just Verizon, or is that other carriers that are selling these are selling them for more than what you get it from Google? And why is that?
So I've only seen it with the regular 6, not the Pro.
Okay.
Yeah, the Pro is actually $899 on Verizon's website. But the regular Pixel 6 is more expensive at least AT&T and Verizon because it has millimeter wave, because those two carriers push it. T-Mobile actually sells it for the same $599 as Google. That's the only reason for the price difference, is the millimeter wave costs more to add. That's why the Pixel 5 in the US last year was more expensive than it was internationally, was just because it had millimeter wave in the US. So Google didn't do that this year, so that way they could have as low as price as possible. And then as far as the difference in really beyond the millimeter wave, there's not much of a difference between the two versions of the phone. If you buy it unlocked, you're going to get mostly the same experience.
Okay. All right. Now, one thing that I have noticed just related to this, the Pixel 5a 5G, and I'm definitely looking to test it on the 6 as well. But on the 5a 5G, I took my wife's Verizon SIM, popped it in there, and everything worked except inbound messages, SMS messages. So I'm really curious to see if that's the same here. I know that Verizon says, hey, we've got this version of the phone that's compatible with our network. That's probably what we're looking at here as far as why that didn't work. But, I jumped through hoops. I was on the phone for hours with Verizon doing the CDMA list switch to try and get messaging to work on it, just to see if I could get it to work, and to no avail. So I'm curious to know if that's going to be the same thing with the 6. But at the end of the day, it sounds like if you want it to work on Verizon, you probably have to just pony up the extra $100 and get their version of it. Yeah, I suppose that makes sense. Google revealed, we had known leading up to the event that there was going to be 5 years of OS updates, air quotes updates. And then we found out shortly before the event that it was probably going to be 3 years of major updates, possibly 4. People were hoping for 4, with 5 years of security updates. It did end up being the 3 major OS revisions within that 5-year period. What's your take on that? I personally, I'm happy that Google is stepping forward and saying, hey, we're offering 5 years of updates. I feel like it serves a really great example for other OEMs in the Android ecosystem. But as far as the 3 years versus 4 years, what are your thoughts on that? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, personally, I'm always in favor of extending these timelines out as far as possible, especially now that Google has more control over the chip and how long that can be supported. Yeah. 3 years is, the standard. It's more than you'll get from a lot of others, especially at $599. I mean, for the base model, you're getting 5 years of support and 3 major updates. So that's a great value. But it would have been nice if they had been able to extend out the OS updates maybe just one more year as a show of good faith, or to just prove that Tensor changes the game for them. 3 is good. 5 years of security updates is the kicker in terms of keeping these phones relevant for longer. It makes it safe for someone to continue using it for longer than the average Android phone, which is nice. Hopefully it's something that they can continue to work on in future versions of Tensor, though.
Yeah, knowing that it's close to Google, right? Like you said, they've created the chip, the Tensor chip on the inside. They have a lot of incentive, a lot of motivation to keep this phone as relevant as possible, to prove, all of the positive benefits of, all the work that they've done behind Tensor, and also kind of, very publicly stepping into the spotlight to say, hey, we are offering a premium smartphone now and for a pretty great price. So they have a lot of incentive to kind of prove the longevity of that. So who knows? Part of me wonders if, because we've been surprised about this in the past on Pixel devices where we didn't think it was going to get another update. And then I can't remember which one it was, if it was the Pixel 1. And then it got that next update and it was like, whoa, okay, yeah. That's a surprise. But, maybe Google will do that here too. Who the heck knows? Maybe they'll be able to. It's just a time will tell sort of thing.
Yeah, I'd say the odds are stronger this year than most. Yeah,
I would agree. I would agree with that. And then, of course, we had the fun little, stumble out of the gate. We were talking about Rene Ritchie about this before the show started. I was doing live coverage of the show with Leo, and he was trying the entire dang time to order his phone and was just having all sorts of problems. He was not alone. And then there's the fact that the devices are shipping to a smaller number of regions. You had written that India is not set to get the phone, although that's not too far from what we've been seeing in recent Pixel releases. But I guess my question, summarizing all of that together, is that Google really wanted and has made it known that it really wants to market and sell this phone as widely as possible. They've increased the number, of units that they're going to get out there. And little stumbles like these seem to me to be the kinds of things that in aggregate can really slow that down. How important is it to Google to cover regions like India if they want to really fulfill their desire to make this as widely successful as possible?
I would think in the short term, especially in the midst of this global chip shortage, expanding to India and more countries is probably not their priority. I would think that just getting it more established in their core markets, which clearly is the United States, for them, getting more foothold in those regions would help them create a name, and then as they expand, have a reputation going forward. So hopefully, as they continue to market, it will grow. And marketing really is kind of their sore point. I had written a piece about this earlier this week about how past Pixel phones just were not marketed properly. Google spent all their time focusing on the camera, and now they're finally hopefully it seems like they're starting to focus on the things that really make this phone great, which is the software and things like Magic Eraser and the spam call filtering and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Yes. And everyone should definitely read your comment piece on kind of the marketing failure or the marketing, challenges that Google has faced in the past. It strikes me that, many people are very vocal about the fact that the thing that they care most about on their phone is the camera. So I can understand why Google might lean further into that, not to mention everybody, has long said, the Pixel phones have had one of the best cameras in smartphones on the market. So Google really knew that it had something there to promote. So how, what is success then? If Google follows your advice, is it that they're creating a lot more attention around the real world use cases of some of these AI applications that they're embedding into the phone? What does that look like?
Yeah, I would. Like you said, the camera is something that people care about, but at the same time, it's something that all of Google's competitors have started to at least figure out, if not surpass Google on. If we think of just the latest iPhones, are pretty much the direct competitor to Google here. The quality of stills is great, and the video is far beyond what Google is capable of right now. So it's really those AI things that Google can make a name for itself and kind of get forward on, because things like call screen is something that is genuinely useful and something that makes me want to stay on my Pixel and not my Fold. Those are the things that are valuable to people in real life. Things like the new feature Magic Eraser, which has already proven very impressive and useful, but we can't really talk about that much yet. And even one of the new things that they announced during the event was the ability to see wait times for toll-free lines, like repair lines and stuff. So you can see how much time am I going to be spending here, or it can create a visual menu for you so you don't have to remember which option to press. Things like that are actually, they're actually useful to people in their daily lives versus, features on like Samsung phones and OnePlus phones that, they're neat or they might be useful from time to time, but they're not really going to make or break a phone. And honestly, anyone else can copy that if they put in the work. Google stuff is different, and now that they're using Tensor to build it up and make it better, it's harder for their competition to keep up on it.
Yeah, indeed. That really is the big differentiator for Google and their devices. And I'm excited to see how it all plays out. Ben, really appreciate you taking 15 minutes to spend with us talking about the Pixel 6 and the 6 Pro. Ben Schoen, of course, writes for 9 to 5 Google. If people want to follow you online and find what you're doing, where can they find you?
I'm mainly active on Twitter at NexusBen. We'll have our Pixel review in the future. I'll be reviewing the 6 Pro and the 6 soon after. So looking forward to that.
Right on. Excellent. All right. Look forward to that. Thank you again, Ben. We'll talk with you soon. Appreciate it.
All right.
All right. Take care. All right, coming up, Mikah's got his story of the week. We transition into our story of the week time. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Compiler. Compiler is an original podcast from Red Hat, and it really covers tech topics, big, small, and even strange. Compiler comes to you from the makers of Command Line Heroes, another of our sponsors who you've heard us talk about, hosted by Angela Andrews and Brett Simoneau. And, it's all about how technology can be big, it can be bold, bizarre, sometimes very complicated. Compiler unravels industry topics, trends, and the things you've always wanted to know about tech through interviews with the people who really, they just know it best. On their show, you're going to hear just a bunch of perspectives from a diverse community, all the diverse communities behind the code. Compiler brings together a curious team of Red Hatters to tackle big questions in tech, like what is technical debt? Or what are tech hiring managers actually looking for? That could be super useful if you're in the job market. And do you have to know how to code to get started in open source? Well, the first episode covers a topic that's very debated in the tech world. Should managers code? Should they actually code, or should they stick to managing? Jumping in to fix a problem can be very seductive. In this episode of Compiler, you're going to hear from a manager who's actually learned that supporting his team to fix the problem rather than doing it himself might be slower, but it can lead to better results. And I will just speak from personal experience and say that, wow, it is really hard to do that, but it's always worth the time. But man, in the moment, sometimes it just feels easier for me to just jump in there and do it. But delegation's important. A managerial position is seen as a milestone of working life. Suddenly a person who worked on code now shifts everything, begins to step back from those day-to-day tasks. What does that actually mean? What started as an internal email at Red Hat actually blossomed into a much deeper discussion about career growth and what can get caught in its wake. If you've ever walked into an interview and been asked to work through a coding problem on a whiteboard, and then realize, once you were hired, that you don't actually spend that much time in front of a whiteboard on the job. Well, and how do you interview for a technical position? Red Hatters cast a skeptical eye toward the dreaded whiteboard interview, but discover that it does have some real benefits. And you should check it out for yourself. I've checked out the first episode, Should Managers Code? And, like I said, it really cast a light on my own let's say, insecurities around delegating to others when I know that I could do something very effectively. It's nice to know that others have to have challenges around that too, especially people in high profile, positions. But you should listen to it for yourself. Listen to Compiler on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to podcasts. We'll also include a link on this episode's show page, so you can find it there. My thanks to Compiler for their support of Tech News Weekly and the TWiT Network. All right, Mikah, what you got for your story of the week?
This is an interesting one for me because I think this opens up a conversation about the future of gaming in general. There are some major players in the streaming gaming space. Of course, Microsoft has its own service that's Xbox Cloud Gaming, I think is now what it's called. It used to be called xCloud. There's PlayStation, which has its own version, although not quite stand out as some of the other ones. And Amazon, that has Amazon Luna. Netflix has been talking about getting into the streaming gaming space. Of course, there's the Steam store and some of the functionality that exists right now and could come to exist in the future. And
Stadia
then there's Exactly. And then there's Nvidia GeForce Now, which is a cloud gaming service that's been out for some time and has gone through different iterations. So the fascinating thing is that depending on which system, which streaming platform you use, you may be dealing with a sort of middleman facilitator, or you may be dealing with a content library. So PlayStation's streaming platform is more of a content library. It's the stuff that PlayStation has available for you to stream if you so choose. But something like Amazon Luna, for the most part, is a facilitator. You access games that exist on, multiple platforms that are made by publishers elsewhere. And what they give you is an emulator, essentially, to be able to play those games. NVIDIA GeForce Now works that same way. Essentially, what happens is they spin up a virtual machine for you, and you can then go on to play different games, be it in your Safari browser, on an iPhone or an iPad, on the Mac through the app, on Android devices, including the Google's television. All these different devices, they just spin up something on the other side, and then it's essentially like Netflix, but a little bit more back and forth, meaning that they are streaming the view of what is happening on that machine. So it's kind of like going and picking a movie in terms of the streaming, but unlike Netflix, you are also sending commands to the server to be able to move the person around or move the character around, whatever you're doing. This opens up the ability for people to be able to game in places that they weren't able to game before. So even if you don't have a PlayStation or an Xbox console, or you don't have a Windows machine, you are still able to play these different games. Now, the latest news is that Nvidia has released a new version of its Nvidia GeForce Now service that works with the RTX 3080 GPU. This is a very popular, almost always sold out GPU that will allow you to use one of these so you can stream it up to 1440p at 120 frames per second. Now, Two things. You're going to need a very good internet connection to do this. It requires, because you are still streaming all of that over the service. So if you are trying to do this over Wi-Fi, you may have some issues, even with 5 gigahertz and the latest multiple in, multiple out routers, et cetera, et cetera. And the second thing is that it's going to cost. NVIDIA doesn't let you do this as a month-to-month subscription. So I want to be clear. NVIDIA offers a free version of its service, $0 a month. You can game for up to an hour. You get standard access, so that means that when the server is kind of bogged down, you won't be able to play. And you get what they call a basic rig, meaning it doesn't have the latest and greatest features. For $9.99 a month or $50 for 6 months, you get to game on a premium rig with RTX. Now, whether that's the RTX 3080 or not, that's where things are. That's where the priority service does not have. You also get priority access, meaning that if things are bogged down with lots of people playing, you have more of an option to play than somebody who's using the free service. You get 6 hours worth of gameplay at a time, and you can game at up to 1080p at 60 frames per second. Now, the most expensive one does not let you do month to month. They want you to be all in. So it's $99.99 for 6 months of service. With that, you get the RTX 3080. You get even more access because they have specific RTX 3080 servers, an 8-hour session length, and then again up to 1440p at 120 frames per second. And if you're using NVIDIA's own Shield TV, then you can also stream in 4K HDR. What's interesting, so if we take that $100 divided by 6, that's about $17 a month, which is a little more than you pay for, the people pay for Netflix. So for gamers who want to do that, want to be able to play at this level, that's not a terrible price. But you do have to you don't get to just dip your toe in. You got to commit to 6 months. But here's where things get interesting to me, is the person that would pay $99.99 for 6 months, about $18 a month to play at that level. Are they not the person who also already has the gaming PC, who already has the PlayStation, whatever the most recent one is, who already has an Xbox One S or an Xbox One X? And the people who, like me, are occasional gamers who have settled with testing out the priority version. We're already kind of covered. We don't need it to be at more than 1080p at 60 frames per second. So, I mean, there have to be people out there who want this, but it's interesting to me kind of where we are in the scheme of things as content publishers and creators are working to make their games available on more platforms. And gaming is switching from, you go out and you buy this console that is purpose built for gaming, and instead we're hopping pretty heavily into this virtual space and saying, hey, I want to be able to game on whatever thing I have in front of me, whatever screen I have in front of me. I don't want to have to game on a purpose-built console that sits next to my television. And I think that's really cool. I think that it's cool that folks can use whatever device they want to use when they want to use it, and that out of that they get this really, they can get this really premium experience. So it's interesting. I'm curious, Jason, for you. I think we've talked before and you about how not really too much gaming in your life, mostly because not having the time to do so. But are you more of a console or PC person, or could you see a future where this is the way that you would go, where you're gaming online because you didn't get the console, don't need the console?
Yeah, I mean, I could see myself getting there eventually. I would say if I game anywhere, it's either the PS4. I'm a generation behind. We've got a PS4 downstairs, and it's perfectly fine for us right now. My kids are young enough and not so entirely into gaming that they care about the difference or even really recognize the difference between a PS4 and a PS5. Actually had an opportunity to get a PS5, and I thought about it for a second. I was just like, I just don't feel like I need to do that right now. I don't know that I need the cost for it. So that's where, if we game, that's where we do the majority of the gaming outside of VR, which is probably the game system that I enjoy most, and that's the Quest and the Quest 2. We've got both. So, I mean, yeah, sure. I'm going to be talking about Stadia in my story of the week. But of these services, Stadia is the one that I've used with any sort of regularity. And there again, like not very regular because I'm not interested in purchasing my library in the cloud and then hoping that that service stays. Again, we're going to talk about that in the next story of the week. But no question, there are people out there who aren't interested in dropping $2,000 for this card and who are fine paying $100 every 6 months to reap the benefits of it. I'm certain, like I understand what you're saying as far as like, you know, what is the Venn diagram of the people who would actually buy this and wouldn't they already have a system? But I think more and more, as we have more of these services set up and we enter into this cloud gaming generation, which it seems like, you know, is not going anywhere and is only going to continue improving and offering these things, you know, better fidelity, better processing power, you know, the best of the best rendering of a particular game. As we continue to move more and more into that, I think the industry is hedging its bets and saying, once we get there, then the people who would be the hardcore gamers might then be enticed to not have to spend nearly as much or, you know, maintain their own machines when it's just as good over here. And I don't know that we're necessarily there yet, but I could absolutely see this heading in that direction, you know, as well as 5G networks, you know, becoming more proliferated and supported. It seems like that's the direction that everything's heading. So whether this is a value for that person now, maybe that's one consideration, but maybe it's definitely a consideration for that person, you know, in a year or two or however long, whatever that time frame is, when we get to the point to where this becomes incredibly appealing to everyone because it's just it's checking all the boxes at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see kind of how this continues to develop, and if we just have all of the options versus some of the options. I mean, the more the merrier is kind of how I feel about it. All right, folks, coming up, we've got Jason Howell's story of the week. But first, I want to take a break so I can tell you about PlexTrack, who are bringing you this episode of Tech News Weekly. PlexTrack is the security management platform that brings you better reports, deeper assessments, and more insight. Do you spend hours and hours reporting security issues and feel like it's getting you nowhere? Are you buried in data but still can't get a full picture of your security posture to prioritize remediation effort? Well, we have got the solution for you. PlexTrack empowers continuous assessment, automated workflow, and effective collaboration between teams to help cybersecurity professionals do more in less time. You can create assessment reports in half the time and centralize your remediation efforts across all scans, assessments, and audits through powerful risk visualizations, scanner and ticketing integrations, and enhanced analytics to effectively communicate risks in real time. Whether red or blue, there is a PlexTrack for every security professional to save time and get the right work done. Red teams can import findings from numerous vulnerability scanners. They can include screenshots and videos with auto-formatting. They can create customized templates and export to Word with one click. And they can streamline the report writing process to deliver better reports faster. And blue teams can customize internal and external assessment questionnaires, synchronize findings with task management tools like Jira Cloud, assign findings to team members and track status over time, and provide attestation of security posture with robust analytics. Whether you're with a small to medium-sized security consultancy, a full-scale MSSP, or a large enterprise, security teams of all sizes and specialties will work more effectively and efficiently with PlexTrack. PlexTrack is the premier cybersecurity workflow management and reporting platform for every professional, from practitioner to CISO. There's truly a PlexTrack for every security team. PlexTrack improves the entire security engagement lifecycle by making it easy to generate security reports, deliver them securely, and track the issue to completion straight from the platform. So book a demo today. Try PlexTrack free for 1 month and see how it can change your life as a security professional. Simply go to plextrack.com/twit and claim your free month. That's plextrack.com/TWIT. And of course, we thank PlexTrack for their support.
All right. Well, and this totally ties in very conveniently with what you were talking about and with Google from earlier in the show. Because there's news today that Google is doing with Stadia something that we've expected for quite a while, and that's making it a white label service. And I thought it would just kind of, be fitting to kind of walk through kind of where we are with Stadia and kind of where we came from, because it's complicated because it's a Google service, right? And Google, love it or hate it, Google has a total reputation for starting something really great and then at the worst possible time turning its back on it. And that's why we have the Killed by Google site, that has been created to monitor and, keep an eye on all the ways in which Google has these efforts that it just loves one day, and then another day it completely changes. And in some cases it goes away. And we've seen that time and time again. So Stadia is Google's cloud streaming service, of course. Of course, you're probably familiar with it. It launched back in 2019, although it was beta tested back in 2018 as Project Stream. I don't know if you remember that. They had Assassin's Creed Odyssey streaming in Chrome browsers for a select pool of people. And then that ultimately led to its 2019 launch. And when it launched, I very, very specifically remember people being both excited and skeptical, because it was like, okay, it was the first major service that Google launched where I really saw people immediately jump to and how long is that going to last? And it was kind of one of those things where it was like, okay, well, it better last a long time, because Google's obviously put an insane amount of money and effort into this. Like, they didn't treat it as just like a little fly-by-night thing, at least in the beginning. What they were promising, they delivered on, although it had technical hiccups. Definitely when I played around with it when it first launched, it wasn't a perfect streaming experience for games, and especially like action games like Mortal Kombat or whatever. It was harder to play in the cloud than maybe slow moving kind of, adventure type games. But you could see how, if this is where we are now, where it's going to build up to, and kind of similar to what you're talking about, right? Like, as the technology improves, as the server farms are built out, and the types of servers that they're running to power all of this, you can imagine that 2, 3, 4 years down the line, this is totally the future, and this is just the beginning stages that we're at now. They created a game studio. They acquired another one. They were hiring big name industry veterans, game industry veterans. And it really seemed like, okay, well, Google's serious about this. But there was always that lingering kind of hesitation in the back of my head, and I know a lot of others, where it's like, okay, well, but this could change at any moment. And sure enough, it did. Ultimately, Google ended up announcing earlier, I think it was earlier this year, like January or February, basically announced that their studios that they had created were folding. All of those big name, game developers that they had brought in were no longer working for Stadia. So a lot of exits happening suddenly. And, which kind of seems short-sighted also, because a lot of people who really follow the game industry will tell you that AAA games, the types of titles that Google was looking to create to be exclusives for Stadia, these don't just take like a year or two. They take many years to kind of build over time. And it really seemed like Google killed the effort before it ever really got started. So that was very short-sighted on their part. So where was this all heading then? That was just earlier this year. A lot of people were wondering, and I want to say that maybe we had Sam Miskovich on around that time to talk about this, and that he had mentioned, hey, it's entirely possible that Google takes the technology that's behind Stadia and offers that to others. Like, maybe we don't have the Google Stadia game library, in the cloud that we have now, as much as we have Google creating the technology so that anyone can use this game streaming online for their effort, and it's not necessarily offered by Google. And that appears to be where we're at now. AT&T is offering customers a chance to play Batman Arkham Knight online, in an online streaming way. And Yes, it's powered by Stadia behind the scenes. Of course, neither of them acknowledged that or mentioned it up front. If you went to AT&T's site, nowhere would you find Google or Stadia on the site. They were keeping it very obscured. 9to5 Google found references to Cloudcast in some of the site code. And Cloudcast is actually one of the internal code names for the Stadia technology. So that was an indication. And then when they reached out to AT&T and Google, both have since confirmed that Stadia is indeed powering the experience. So now you have exactly what kind of people were expecting to happen back then. Arkham Knight isn't actually offered on Stadia's service either. So this is truly unique to AT&T in its offering. It's a limited time offer by AT&T. It's streamed at 1080p. Of course, you can stream it to Chrome or Edge desktop browsers. But it's interesting, and my take on this is that Google, I'm not certain that Google was playing to its strengths by creating a game development studio or even playing to its strengths by creating a platform where it serves up all these games that you still have to pay full price for and they reside in the cloud. And there's a lot of uncertainty there. It's certainly been the thing that's held me back from buying a game in the cloud, because if Google does indeed do what it's done so many times, pulls the rug out from under Stadia as we know it right now, there is no physical copy of that game. That $60 or however much it costs to buy that AAA title, it's just gone when Google decides that it's no longer interested. And so that's enough to keep me hesitant to really invest in it. And I don't think that's Google's strength. Offering the technology to companies like AT&T and whoever else, you have to imagine that there's other deals in the pipeline behind the scenes that we don't know about yet. That seems like it's Google's strength. They've created the technology to be able to do this. They have the server farms somewhere, powering all of this, and kind of doling that out on a deal-by-deal basis to the companies that don't want to build all this infrastructure for themselves, but do want to offer something unique like this on their own. That seems like a winning deal. I don't know what that means for Stadia as it exists right now. I'm curious to know what direction you might guess that goes. But anyways, I think that it's smart for Google to open it up and do this. It just makes me nervous about what happens to the Stadia proper.
Yeah, I think Google would be better equipped to just be, as I mentioned earlier, the sort of facilitator of online streaming if they want to do this. They know a thing or two about web services and have knowledge of that. And so I think that they could do a good job there. But to sort of hire out a team of first-party publishers and try to, release their own games, I think for any company I think that's part of the reason why Apple has not done that, is because it's a big resource management issue. It's a huge investment. It is, why not, as a company that is used to making so many platforms that people work on, be it Google Workspace or Android or any of these, continue to do that, continue to be the thing that people use to get access to the content. Yeah, exactly. Versus trying to go out and be Netflix or I'm trying to think of any of these, Steam or any of these online kind of game platforms. So I'm still kind of hesitant as it is about where I choose to put some of my funds in trying out these different things, because I don't know which ones are going to stay around and which ones are going to go away.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose there is a time at which, at least from my own experience, there is a time at which I'm no longer care about a particular title. I have a PlayStation 3 packed away somewhere, and I have, a handful of games for that. And do I really care that I still own those games? Am I really going to pull that thing out and play them? Maybe I'm different from other people who actually would, but I'm probably not going to do that. With PlayStation 4, I've bought a number of titles, but those are actually, compatible on the PlayStation 5. So if I was to get the 5, I still have the ability to play those. if I'm buying games in the cloud on the Stadia service, and they, there is a point at which those games, go away if Google decides it doesn't want to do it anymore. And I suppose if they're older games, I care less. But if they're newer games, that really would suck. So maybe it makes more sense for Google to, like you said, offer up this technology to the companies that would sit on it and maybe do it right. And maybe that also encourages that technology to stay relevant and stay developed and up to date over time. I do wonder, kind of from a monetary standpoint, how much Google stands to make off of a white label Stadia business model versus what they were doing before. But I mean, I don't have any real numbers to point to as far as how successful Stadia has been. Just, from reading, people's opinions online and everything, it doesn't seem to me like Stadia has been a raging success. But I don't know what that translates to into numbers. And I suppose if it had been a raging success, they probably wouldn't have let go of all of their expert game developer hires and done what they've done so far. So signs aren't pointing to, it being a huge success. Maybe this gives them some extra life. And I think it's a smart direction to go.
Yes, I agree. I believe that's the end.
That's it. We've reached the end. So thank you so much for watching and listening each and every week. Tech News Weekly publishes every Thursday at twit.tv/TNW. That's where you can go to subscribe to the show, find it in audio, video formats, and YouTube. Jump out there.
And if you want all of our shows with no ads, you should check out Club TWiT. Because for $7 a month, you are going to get every Twitch show with no ads. You're also going to get access to the exclusive Twit Plus bonus feed that has content you won't find anywhere else. It's behind the scenes, it's before, it's after, it's all that stuff that we don't include in the final episode, free for you to check out. Well, free for you to check out as a member. And you get access to the members only Discord server, which is my favorite thing. It's where you can go to chat with us and with your fellow Club TWiT members. It's a fun hangout place. We think it's a pretty awesome place to hang out. Plus, with Ant Pruitt at the helm of the content there's lots of great stuff that we've been publishing that is exclusive to Twit Plus members. If all of that sounds good to you, you should head to twit.tv/clubtwit to check it out. We also got some feedback that some folks just wanted to sponsor their favorite shows directly. And so if you are an Apple Podcasts listener, well, I've got some good news for you. If you want to sponsor this show directly, you can with Apple Podcasts. Simply find the audio feed of Tech News Weekly, and you'll see a little button you can press. For $2.99 a month, you get the audio version of the show ad-free, and you'll be sending that support our way. A warm, fuzzy feeling without all the extra stuff that you would get via Club TWiT if you're just looking to support the show directly. By the way, if you would like to follow me online, just head to chihuahua.coffee, CHIHUAHUA.coffee, as that has links to the places I'm most active online. You can check me out a little later today on Smart Tech Today with Dan Morin, who will be joining me for the show. And on Tuesday, you can check out iOS Today with Rosemary Orchard. The episode we just published this week, we reviewed the new Apple Watch Series 7. So check that out to learn more about the Series 7 Apple Watch. Jason Howell, what about you?
Well, you can follow me over on Twitter at Jason Howell, doing all about Android, twit.tv/AAA. And then, of course, next week, Leo will be out of town starting, is it Wednesday, I think? So for next week and the week after, I'll be filling in for Leo on This Week in Google, and then in a couple of weeks on Security Now. So we'll be busy over here in Twitland. So check that out. Quick mention of best ofs. We are in the thick of it right now, planning our best ofs for the end of the year. And if there are interviews that you have seen on this show that you thought were the best of this year, even if you don't know which episode it was, but you know the person, just go to twit.tv/bestof and fill it out to the best of your ability and let us know. That'll help us create the best of that we can. We appreciate it. Big thanks to John Ashley, to Burke, to John Slanina, everyone at the studio helping us do the show every week. And thanks to you for watching and listening. We'll see you next time on Tech News Weekly. Bye, everybody.
So you got yourself the brand new latest and greatest iPhone or Samsung smartphone because you heard about all of the beautiful photography those things can create. But for some reason, you're just not quite getting it done when you try to make your photos. Or you got yourself a brand new camera because you were interested in getting started in photography, but your little new inexpensive camera still isn't quite cutting it. Well, you need to check out my show, Hands-On Photography, here on TWiT. I'm going to show you how to be a better photographer and a better post-processor, and quite frankly, just help you get the most out of that new camera that's either on your phone or the brand new one that you just got for your birthday or gifts or what have you. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So head on over to twit.tv/hop. That's twit.tv/HOP and subscribe today.